Hey there, Watershed. David Roberts here with another installment of Theological Thursdays. I'm joined by my partner in crime here, Tommy Allgood, and we are actually going to be hitting a question that came in right at the tail end of our Q&A at the end of our talk this last Sunday about queer theology.
Yeah.
It's a question that we thought was really good, and it popped in right as we were wrapping up, so we didn't have a chance to dive in. So, sound all right?
Good question too. So.
It was. Yeah. So this question right at the end, it came from, I believe it was Kylie Cornett who said this, and the question was for someone who feels like they're still on a journey of self-discovery in regards to identity and can be overwhelmed, where to begin? And so my first thought, I've read it a few times, so I'll let you sit with it for a second. My first thought in hearing that question would be sort of a warning mixed with a permission giving. And what I mean by that is there's going to be a temptation. If you're trying to free yourself from, in the sermon we talked about normativity, and this idea that there's this standard or this norm, and wholeness or fulfillment or even salvation is usually oriented around meeting or matching or finding yourself within that norm. And we talked a lot about the need to kind of put that norm to death or let it die, which then frees you to kind of exist outside of it. Well, here's the temptation. The temptation in that, I think, is often going to be to create a new norm. And that new norm might be against the norm. It might be a countercultural norm or a non-normative norm, but we create a new standard, a new principle, a new way of being that is different than the norm. That's then going to fulfill us.
Yeah. So I think that's great. I would answer it slightly differently. As a queer person in my experience, and for a person exploring their identity, the first thing I would say is explore. And the second thing I would say is I'll sort of take more of a coaching approach to this is, are we able to question the nature of the overwhelm? And what I mean by that is, are we able to identify the thing that is creating the sense of overwhelm? And so is that a fear of loss of community? Is it a fear of having to come out? Is it a fear of not knowing where to position yourself or belong in terms of a particular category? And so all those things can create this sense of overwhelm, right? And what I will say that any journey of identity is a personal journey. And so it's a journey that you have the permission to take your time and discover who you are in your body. I think that, we are so often coming out of faith traditions that villainize the body, but I think that the body has an intelligence for us. And when we're able to get still and listen to it, I think it speaks very clearly. And so play around with this sense of identity. Look for communities in which it is safe to play around. If you need help finding those communities, I would say reach out with Kindred. And also we can look and see what resources that we might need or spaces that we might need to create that might enable people to explore gender identity or sexual identity in a brave space, for instance.
So that's perfect. That you made practical. What for me is inevitably going to be like an academic thing. And I love that word play. I think play is a theological idea that we don't spend enough time with because per our talk, too often theology is kind of the set of rules or principles and things like that. But play scrambles all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of play is it's free. There's a sense of curiosity and imagination. Rules are invented and amended mid-play and things like that. And so I really like that word play. Kind of in closing, I guess then, if you don't mind, your own journey of transformation.
Okay.
You know, there would have been a time in your life, kind of as a practical example, there would have been a time in your life where transformation, it would have been dictated to you as a journey from, you know, what might be a more playful identity to something more normative. You know, going from queer.
Pray the gay away.
Right. You know, going from gay or queer or trans to cis or straight, you know, and more heteronormative. So if in a space wherein that is no longer the demand being placed upon you, what does transformation look like for you?
Yeah, so I struggle a little bit with the question in some ways, simply because I think that there's an internal transformation always happening. I'm always in discovery of my identity and always bumping up against the limits of those containers in which we put our identities in, right? Transformation for me, instead of trying to root into any sense of normativity, often looks like, what does it look like to push against that normativity? So the best example is this space here at Watershed. I've been here for 6+ or so years, and we're not the same community who we were 6 years ago, not just because of me, right, but because of all the queer bodies and queer people who have showed up on this journey and begin to challenge these narratives with their bodies, with how they're living and experiencing their lives outside of the church. We're able to bring these into the church and see how we are then transforming spaces and institutions. So transformation looks like this permission for me to be, to live as authentically as possible in all spaces. And then what I inevitably see is, when I show up authentically, the spaces around me, the institutions that choose to say, I want to be in relationship with you, that's actually what's changing.
Right.
And for me, it's more of this rootedness into acceptance of who I am.
So I love that, because you, in telling a little bit of your story, you illustrated exactly what we were talking about in our dialogue on Sunday, is you named this reality wherein the space of your life, your lived existence in your body, serves as almost kind of the site or the gateway or the opportunity for the broader community, for the world that we occupy, to both die and be reborn.
Yep.
You know, Tommy, I'm just going to make this explicit because I'm a company man. Tommy literally embodied this idea of awakening and struggling and loving together as if a different world was possible today. And it's a time, it's a journey that we're still on. And we're grateful for your contributions and quite a number of other.
So one word of caution, as we talk about awakening and struggling together, if the community that you find yourself in isn't also moving along that journey with you, and creating more tension or more of a sense of non-belonging to the degree in which it's damaging to you, then that is not a safe or healthy community for you to be in as you're living out either whether it be gender identity or your queerness. And so there has to be, the onus is not just on the queer body or the queer person to root in, but really for the institutions, for the churches, to come along in the journey and say, well, how can we welcome you to the table?
Yeah. So an important caveat, even in our kind of mission statement about awakening, struggling, loving, is that we're together. And if they're not going with you, then that might not be the best or safest place for you to go on. Well, I think that's it. Tommy, thank you for joining me. Watershed, it's always fun to see you in this way, and we look forward to you joining us again at future installments of Theological Thursdays.